Aziz, and I'm the host of the ENC In-Depth Podcast. Today's in-depth discussion is dedicated to the recently published ENC analysis, Social Media and Jihadism, the Shaping of a New Discourse, by Dr. Emna Ben Arab. The debate is part of the ENC In-Depth Podcast discussions with experts and academics assessing the developments in Middle East and North Africa in the fields of security, foreign policy, economy, democracy, and education. But let me introduce my virtual companion for today's podcast discussion. Dr. Emna Ben Arab is an ENC Academic Council member, an academic at the University of Sfax, who also served as a member of the Tunisian Parliament during 2004 and 2011. Emna, welcome to the ENC In-Depth Podcast.
Thank you, Andreas, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
The pleasure is all mine to virtually have you with us today. Now, in your paper, which was originally published in 2021, last year, as a book chapter in the Shaping Public Opinion volume, which was published by the University of Sfax, you explore the role of social media in shaping a jihadi narrative that played a decisive role in radicalizing an unprecedented number of youth. You examine in this article Tunisia as a case study. So I would like to start our discussion by asking you to give us, or to tell us actually, what is the overarching objective of this study?
My overarching objective is threefold. Through the study, which is based on the analysis of jihadi content published in mainstream social media. First, I sought to explore the role of social media in shaping a jihadi narrative. This narrative played clearly a decisive role in radicalizing an unprecedented number of people and inspiring them to travel to Syria and join ISIS and other groups. And for the study, I took Tunisia as a case in action, given the high number of Tunisians who joined radical groups in Syria, Iraq, and Libya. This number, according to Tunisian authorities, reached around 3,000, and this number signaled the existence of a propaganda campaign targeting these young people. So the paper also seeks, based on that, to provide a framework through which to understand jihadi discourse based on shaping the perceptions of a target audience and on reinforcing already existing polarization. And all of this for the purpose of developing counter-narrative strategies. So my main argument is that anti-jihadi narrative strategies need to be synchronized and political military strategy, and the actions has to be bridged for the narrative credibility. And for this, I used an approach that is based on a combination of quantitative analysis of social media content and also interviews with Tunisian radicalized youth in prisons.
Now, in your paper, you refer to the organizational decentralization of Al-Qaeda and the golden age of internet forums and afterwards social media, such as Twitter, as popular mediums for propaganda dissemination. Can you guide us through the strategic logic of ISIS messaging?
Indeed, what is striking with the jihadi movement in general is its adaptation and the adaptation of its discourse to the evolution of the online media landscape and how it is used to serve the ideology it seeks to advance. And this was clear first with Al-Qaeda, when its organizational decentralization started, in the immediate aftermath of Operation Enduring Freedom carried out by the United States and its allies against Afghanistan in 2001 in response to the 9/11 attacks. So Al-Qaeda was hit hard and its leaders had to go underground. And the movement was therefore transformed from a hierarchical centralized organization to a decentralized one with branches in Iraq and in the Maghreb. And this this trend has continued. I mean, lately there are branches in the Sahel, which is becoming the new epicenter of jihadism. Anyway, this organizational decentralization did not signal the death of the movement, but it adapted to the new situation and also to the new opportunities provided by the internet, from the jihadi sphere of forums to the social media platforms. So this evolution and this adaptation of the movement made previously internet content consumers become internet content producers and disseminators of jihadi content. So this new era, which was ushered in by social media, allowed a robust presence of jihadis on the net and was later skillfully used by ISIS in devising its messaging. I mean, one example is that in 2014, around 46,000 Twitter accounts were believed to be used by members or sympathizers of ISIS. So ISIS seems to have fully understood the basics of communication strategy based on the ability to reach its target audience with a relevant and resonating message. So this is what Hororo Indram calls the 3 R's. So reaching their audience with a relevant and resonating message in order to attain its objectives of shaping perceptions of the other. The other is usually the authorities in place, whether they are political, religious, security forces, or anyone or any institution that represents authorities. So shaping the perceptions of the others and also polarizing the support of contested populations. And this happens only if the message appeals to both socioeconomic and identity factors. In research, this is called pragmatic and perceptual factors. So the core narrative of ISIS implies that socioeconomic elements are taken care of by ISIS. So ISIS is a geographic entity having territory. It is a political entity with state-like institutions, and also it is a moral entity based on religious teachings. Therefore, ISIS here is ensuring some kind of synchronicity of its narrative and actions, while at the same time denigrating its enemy's narrative by highlighting the gap between their words and actions. So highlighting the lack of synchronicity between narrative and actions, between words and actions. And the perceptual factors play on the identity crisis of us versus them. And through the interviews I carried out within the Tunisian Institute of Strategic Studies of radicalized youth and foreign fighters in Tunisian prisons, this perceptual factor, this question of identity is very strong and multi-layered. So they talk about us, the youth, versus them, the authorities, us, the Sunnis, versus them, the Shiites, us, the Muslims, versus them, the infidels, us, the Arabs, versus them, the Americans and the Israelis, us, the Arab and Muslim world, them, the West. So this is very, very strong, very strongly present when talking to these people. So this identity crisis, I said, of us versus them, and the positive self-presentation and the negative other presentation reinforces polarization and pushes the target audience to engage in identity choice decision-making. So decision-making is based on pragmatic as well as identity considerations. And as I said earlier, at the most basic level, ISIS is aware that the three R's are important. Reaching a target audience or their target audience through social media with a message that is relevant, that is drawing on contextual factors and resonating with these people by appealing to their deep psychological forces.
I just wanted to follow up on your answer, because you also covered some ground, especially with regards to the key characteristics of ISIS communication strategy and their key recruitment message or narrative. I wanted to ask you if you can give us some practical examples, especially from the case of Tunisia. So what is the impact of internet-based jihadi propaganda activities in the country? How successful has it been? And can you share some examples with us?
All right. Although research has shown that the internet-based jihadi propaganda activities in Tunisia have been less robust than in other theaters, the existence of an audience receptive to ISIS messaging is evidenced by its sustainable activity on Tunisian territory, especially during a specific period until 2016. This said, its propaganda has focused on deceptive messaging tactics that seek to advance a winner's message to the Tunisian audience. This message is or ISIS tries to advance this message by exaggerating the view of strength and success by highlighting its own military strength, while at the same time emphasizing the failings of the Tunisian army. An example of this messaging came in May 2015 when Jund al-Khilafa, an ISIS splinter group, released a statement on Twitter claiming that the Tunisian army was unsuccessful in a ground operation against the group, and adding that the security forces were cowardly and had to retreat from the battleground chaotically. So also, ISIS has released similar statements after perpetrating major terrorist attacks in Tunisia. For instance, in ISIS statement claiming responsibility for the Bardo attack, the group vowed that the operation was only the first drop of rain. So this winner's message is part of their strategy. And with the deceptive messaging tactics, the group also works to achieve policy paralysis and sowing confusion and eroding trust in the state and its institutions, and all this in order to create some space to operate and eventually govern. So for this, an intimidation campaign aimed at scaring tourists away from Tunisia, of course, knowing that tourism is a pillar of the Tunisian economy, and maximizing the psychological damage resulting from ISIS perpetrated attacks is orchestrated. Again, after the Bardo attack, the same group, Jund al-Khilafa, tweeted a message directed at tourists that threatened that they were preparing for them something that will make them forget the Bardo attack. And similarly, a couple of months later, also they tweeted a warning to Muslims, asking them not to fly TunisiaA, and here suggesting that an attack on the airliner was imminent. And though such an attack never occurred, the tweet added to the perception that Tunisia was unsafe for tourists, and therefore perpetuating their propaganda strategy that if the group can create the perception of insecurity in Tunisia through all these scare tactics, it can bring about the actual collapse or at least erosion of the state. So their strategy is twofold. It is based on creating a perception that the country is unsafe and the state is overwhelmed and unable to stand up to the group, and also on actual operations on the ground, creating fear and confusion.
Emna, I wanted to ask you, what is the impact, the level of impact towards youth in Tunisia? You spoke about like the tactics used in the country to radicalize ordinary citizens, but I wanted to focus more, and if you have any numbers to share or any examples with regards to the impact that these tactics had on youth, would be very useful.
Right. So from the study, key findings show that from the online narrative analysis and also from the interviews we conducted with a radicalized audience, it is clear that their tactics to radicalize ordinary people or ordinary young people take into account the communication channels, the themes, and the outcome. And to a certain extent, they were successful because, once again, according to Tunisian authorities, around 3,000 people went to Syria and Iraq. And even when talking to these people, to foreign fighters, returnees in Tunisian prisons, we understood that they enjoyed a great support from their families, from their neighborhoods, which shows that there is a sizable radical milieu. It's not only these people, but even their environment, even their milieu. And ISIS communication strategy was in this way successful because it made exceptional use of the technical opportunities made available by social media, such as gamification, convergence, Hollywood cinematic techniques. All of these were fully used. They were also skillfully used. the narrative of ISIS sought to highlight, like I said earlier, synchronicity between discourse and actions for credibility and for rallying support among its target audience. Its appeal seems to come from a combination of an ideological, theological component, the appeal to religion for ideological purposes, and also a structural psychological component, including socioeconomic, political, cultural factors, and also identity-based factors. And also extreme violence, which is ISIS trademark, has helped maximize the reach of the message to friends and foes alike. Shock led to intimidation and also excessive media coverage, and with it a sense of satisfaction, which reinforces the message of victory and of justice being rendered. So here it is important to understand that religious references are used extensively, but they are used as a cover for what is fundamentally a political project driven by ideological and geopolitical imperatives. And while these trends are indicative of the success of jihadi propaganda in radicalizing ordinary people to become members of or fighters for the caliphate, they are, and we have to say this, they are equally reflective of alternative narrative strategies failures due to the lack of the narrative action synchronicity, which is at the heart, I think, of the battle. So ISIS online propaganda techniques, they are more or less the same everywhere, based on what I said, but often contextualized, referring to the target audience specific grievances, specific context. These grievances are in the Muslim world, they are especially socio-economic, political, religious, and in the West, they are based on the identity crisis of Muslim youth in the West, also on the feeling of injustice in the West. And these militant groups play so much on these weak spots made acute, amplified through online propaganda, through social media.
Thanks for this pass, especially the last comment about like the tactics used in throughout the Muslim world. And because I wanted to ask you if you have identified any similarities in the online jihadi propaganda used in Tunisia or communication strategies that they applied in other case studies in other countries. I know that wasn't part of your research study, but maybe you came across similar cases, similar tactics used elsewhere.
Right. Well, Andreas, as I said earlier, the communication strategy is more or less the same. The purpose is to achieve emotional communication based on displaying the seductive appeal of shock and awe methods. And these include gamification, convergence of channels, media channels and content, dramatization, paying attention to detail and technical quality in order to maximize outreach and impact. Also, storytelling and first-hand reports by locals and foreign fighter returnees about their new utopia. Also, the communication style, which is bottom approach, That is, every addressee becomes a content creator, producing and sharing materials and growing the number of followers, growing their network. So this is more or less the same everywhere. The only difference, I believe, is the context. So the propaganda and the communication strategy takes into account the specific grievances of the audience targeted, the specific context of the audience targeted. It's not the same. The context in Tunisia is not the same in France. It's not the same in Belgium. It's not the same in the United States. So they play on this. So they know that disenfranchised youth in the West suffer from identity crisis. They are not fully Westerners, and they are not fully Arabs or Muslims. There is this identity crisis. They suffer from the perception of injustice in the West, whether at the personal level, at the country level, but also at the Ummah level, that is the whole Muslim world. So they play on this, and they make it really clear and acute through online propaganda, through the social media platforms.
Emna, at this point, our discussion has come to an end. I would like to thank you for taking the time to join me once again and for the excellent discussion we had today. It was a pleasure to have you with me today.
Thank you so much, Andreas.
I'm Andreas Marazis, and that was the ENC In-Depth Podcast.